You know, in recent weeks, it's become clear to me that I need to unite my party, my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition.
Well, Joe Biden has just addressed the American people for the first time since his bombshell announcement about 4 days ago, withdrawing from the presidential race. The signs of age and his most recent battle with COVID were there, but there were also some powerful messages from the president in this historic address he's just given from the Oval Office. He defended his record, as we heard, suggesting that that did merit a second term, but he's also putting personal ambition to one side, endorsing his Vice President, Kamala Harris, and suggesting the fate of the Republic is now in the hands of voters. Here, kings and dictators do not rule, the people do, he said. He didn't name Donald Trump. He didn't need to. In the days since the president's announcement, the undeniable excitement amongst Democrats has seen donations pour in for Kamala Harris, who's even shot ahead of Donald Trump in one national poll. There's energy, momentum, and most importantly, hope amongst Democrats that Trump can still be stopped. I'm keen to explore whether, this excitement can be sustained for Kamala Harris, how this contest will now play out, and what's at stake, not just for Americans, but for the world. I'm David Speers on Ngunnawal Country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. Well, Nick Bryant is a former Washington correspondent for the BBC and the author of The Forever War, America's Unending Conflict with Itself. Nick, welcome. Really good to talk to you.
David, it's great to be with you.
So, Joe Biden's address from the Oval Office, what did you make of it?
It was a historic speech that was absolutely laden with history right from the get-go. He was referencing Thomas Jefferson. He was referencing George Washington, his great presidential soulmate, his hero, FDR. There was Benjamin Franklin in there. There was JFK in the line, obviously, from JFK's 1961 inaugural address. The time has come to pass the torch to the next generation. And as you said, all this was to really make the point that democracy is on the line here. The very idea of America is on the line. The soul of America, a line that he has repeated many times over the past 3.5 years, is on the line. And making that point, as you said, that in America, they vest power in the people, not in a monarch or a dictator. And you're right, he didn't mention Donald Trump at all, did he? But he didn't need to. But I thought these were soaring words, but they were delivered in that slur, that whisper from Joe Biden, which explains why he has reached this point. Reluctantly stepping down. That was the subtext of this speech, wasn't it? I didn't want to go. I thought I could still do a second term. I'm still a contender. But my party wouldn't let me. I was blasted out, he was essentially saying, wasn't it? And yeah.
I guess they're hard things to say, right, that I can't beat Donald Trump. He's going to struggle to say that from the Oval Office, but that's the reality. Just on the slurring and the signs of age, do you think this will fuel the suggestion that he really shouldn't be sticking around for the next 6 months in the White House?
Oh, look, I think people will give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. I think the problem with the age issue was a capability issue about the next 4 years, wasn't it? He was making the case that I can be the president until I will be in my sort of mid-80s, 86, I guess he'd be, when he would have left office after 4 years. And I think that was a very hard argument to make. I think it's easier to make the argument that I still am capable of doing the job for the next 6 weeks. But you got a sense of Biden feeling so sort of sad about reaching this point. The internal dialogue, the story that Joe Biden has always told himself, David, is that he is chronically underestimated, that he has been throughout his political career as a senator, as a vice president.
Well, he even went back to the kid with the stutter, sitting here now behind the resolute desk.
I've always come back and overcome really big odds against me. And I think in his heart of hearts, he still believed he could do that. But of course, the party didn't believe that. And I think, within about 10 minutes of that presidential debate, it became clear to so many people that he could not be the presidential nominee of his party.
And this line that he used there in that address from the Oval Office today about the fate of the Republic, it is interesting because in the hours, days after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, there was a bit of a question mark as to whether the Democrats would continue with that line because Trump and so on were saying, this is stirring up people to go after me. But he has returned to it. Does that surprise you at all?
No, because I really do believe he thinks that democracy is on the line. I believe that democracy is on the line as well. I think that's a very powerful argument. I think what's interesting about Kamala Harris in recent days is she hasn't been making that case in the same way. I think, a lot of Democrats think that the power of what happened on January the 6th and the shock of what happened on January the 6th isn't as strong now. People are worried about sort of more bread and butter issues, cost of living, all that kind of thing. Biden really has gone on this sort of January the 6th threat to democracy line. That obviously became a harder line to prosecute after Trump himself had become the victim of an attack on democracy. And here he was saying, I took a bullet for democracy. Yeah. That's a pretty good line, isn't it? But I think, for Biden, it's very clear cut. And even though it looked like a bad choice for many people, this old guy up against this crazy guy, there was a stark choice which Biden was keen to make. And it was this choice between a candidate who believes fiercely in American democracy and a candidate who doesn't believe in American democracy.
Well, it's an even starker choice now with Kamala Harris, what do we call her, the presumptive nominee? It's not formalised yet, but she's got the delegates she needs. The party moved very swiftly behind her, and there is, as I said, this excitement, the poll that shows she's already shot ahead. Is this a Kamala Harris honeymoon, or is this going to be something that's the start of a sustained momentum? What's your best guess?
Well, she's had this amazing 72 hours since Joe Biden announced on Sunday that he was stepping down. And I think people have been very impressed with the speed at which she has managed to secure the nomination. It was almost sort of done and dusted within about 30 minutes of Joe Biden announcing.
Was that a good thing? There's been some debate amongst Democrats as to whether they should have gone to an open convention.
Yeah, look, I'm not sure whether they've ended up with the strongest candidate, but the process of ending up with a stronger candidate might have split the party in two. So it's a really difficult one. It's very hard to deny a vice president the nomination, especially a vice president who's a woman and a woman of colour, especially given that the most loyal demographic in the Democratic coalition is actually African-American women. So to deny Kamala Harris the nomination would have been very difficult. But she did move swiftly, and it was extraordinary. She was on the phone all day, apparently, from the vice presidential residence. She was in a sweatpants sort of calling up all the key power breakers.
I heard like 100 calls in 10 hours.
Amazing.
That's incredible.
You only get that when lawmakers are trying to raise funds, don't you? And she's had this massive fundraising bonanza. I mean, that's the lifeblood of American politics. That is often the metric that political politics in America is judged by. And she's done incredibly well on that. Personally, I don't think she's necessarily the strongest Democrat that they could put up.
Why not? Why not? I mean, what are her strengths? What are her weaknesses?
Look, I think one of her key strengths is she will bring out the worst in Donald Trump. I think that actually is her biggest strength of all.
Interesting.
The racism, the misogyny, they'll ridicule her, I think, amongst...
And Trump won't be able to avoid that? You think it'll come out?
Oh, it's already coming out, isn't it? I mean, he's already called her, a lunatic socialist or whatever. I mean, she's not a socialist by any measure at all. But I think that is perhaps her biggest strength. I mean, clearly she is a far better political communicator now than Joe Biden. I mean, that speech that she delivered in Wisconsin, I was very impressed by. I mean, if you'd seen Kamala Harris campaign in 2019, as I did, she was seeking the 2020 nomination, and she didn't even get to 2020. She had to pull out because she was such a terrible candidate. I mean, speeches were this kind of incomprehensible word salad. She really didn't have a message to run on. But when she gave that line, I prosecuted fraudsters, I prosecuted sexual predators, I understand Donald Trump's type. It was very, very strong. And
it's a pretty clever line because, you're linking him to all of the worst elements and you're saying that he's just not something special. He's just one of that type.
Yeah, I mean, arguably it reinforces this idea that Trump is trying to sort of put out there that he's the victim of this witch hunt, that they're out to get him. She's portraying this as a race between a prosecutor and a felon. There are risks in that, but I mean, the key constituency that she's appealing to, obviously, is the wavering voters that haven't made up their minds yet. She's trying to rev up the Democratic base that wasn't revved up.
So what are her weaknesses then? Because it's not just winning a national majority. That's not how you win the presidency. You've got to win the Electoral College, the 270 votes, and that means winning the swing states where Trump's been doing pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. I mean, there are 3 key states that are going to win this election and decide this election. I mean, we speak about 6 or 7, but there are really 3, and it's Wisconsin, it's Michigan, and it's Pennsylvania. Can she win those Rust Belt states? I always thought that was the rationale for keeping Joe Biden on the ticket. I mean, a year ago, I was sort of creating this sort of what I called the Weekend at Bernie's scenario. That's the movie where Bernie dies, but they pretend he's alive. And I thought there was a kind of rationale for doing that this time around with Biden, for the simple reason that Biden was their best bet in the Rust Belt. That's what he managed to do in 2020. Those states are so important because Donald Trump won them unexpectedly in 2016 and Joe Biden won them back in 2020. They were so-called blue wall states. They were part of this impregnable protective barrier that the Democrats thought they had, and Donald Trump caused this upset by winning those Rust Belt states. Those are the states they needed to win back. I don't think she is necessarily the best candidate in the Democratic Party to do that. But as I say, the process that would have led to a better candidate, I think, would have actually split the party in 2.
Is she vulnerable on the issues around the border, immigration? That's where Trump's going after her.
Yeah, exactly. They're calling her the border czar. She wasn't. I mean, she was basically given a responsibility to travel to Central American countries and trying to sort of stop the flow of immigrants at source. And, that hasn't worked out particularly well. It wasn't as if she was overseeing the border. That definitely is an area of vulnerability. I think, the Trump opposition research would have dredged out quite a lot of stuff from when she was running in 2019. The threat then was from Bernie Sanders. And so I think a lot of Democratic candidates around that time were saying things that would appeal to Bernie Sanders supporters, some left-wing stuff that might resurface, especially around law and order. And I think, she's got the problem that Hillary Clinton had in 2016, which is misogyny. Hillary Clinton also had a problem persuading women to vote for her. Traditionally in American politics, paradoxically, that has been a problem for female candidates to get fellow women to vote for them. She'll have that problem. She'll have the problem of racism. They'll try and tar her as a Californian liberal outside the mainstream of American thought. I mean, those are all the kind of obvious
this is the question. The country well. Is America ready for a woman and Kamala Harris as president?
Well, 2016 showed that America is ready for a woman. I mean, remember, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. They just weren't votes that were in the right places. And that's the critical thing here. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Kamala Harris won the popular vote. I mean, the Democrats have won the popular vote now in 7 out of the last 8 presidential elections. So that was almost a given, although after the assassination attempt, there were some people that think the Republicans can actually win the national vote as well. It's getting those votes in the right places. And that's the problem, I think, for Kamala Harris. It's winning those Rust Belt states.
And how does Trump adjust to this new reality of the campaign?
Well, as I said, I think one of the advantages that Kamala brings to this is that she brings out the worst in him. And I think we're already seeing that happen. I mean, some of the attacks on her are just so sort of overwrought. I mean, calling her a radical socialist lunatic. I mean, that's just too strong. And it does put off those voters who have behavioural concerns about Donald Trump. I mean, those are the key voters who switched from Trump in 2016 to Biden in 2020. Many of those voters are in those key states. Many of them are suburban women. It's often suburban women that decide presidential elections, especially in suburbs of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, those key states that we've been talking about in the Rust Belt. And I think that's the danger for Trump. They just go too hard on Kamala Harris. And, and it's off-putting to the wavering voters that they need to actually get on board as well.
So this contest has now changed. It matters to the world, as I mentioned as well. There are uncertainties around what a second Trump presidency might mean for things like the war in Ukraine, Gaza, China, Taiwan, all of these things, not to mention AUKUS for Australia as well. What about Kamala Harris? Is it a straight line continuation of the Biden approach to foreign policy, or is there scope for some change?
I don't think she's steeped in foreign policy in the same way that Joe Biden is. I don't think she is quite so strongly committed, historically speaking, as he was, because he's been around for so long. I mean, he's a Cold War warrior, essentially, Joe Biden, in a post-Cold War world. I mean, that's where his worldview was formed. I don't think she has that kind of tradition, but clearly she believes in the alliance system that America has built up over the years, which is the basis of its preeminence post-war. She clearly believes in NATO. She clearly believes in supporting Ukraine against Vladimir Putin. So I think she'd see a continuation pretty much of the Biden foreign policy.
What about Israel, though?
I was just going to say, but I think Israel is a kind of interesting thing. That's been a real problem for the Democrats.
Which we saw with Netanyahu just there addressing Congress, and a bunch of them didn't want to be there.
Yeah, and crucially, Kamala Harris wasn't there herself, which would have been a real problem for her, I think, because as vice president, she oversees the Senate, and she would have been expected to be at that joint session.
She's going to meet
Congress.
him, though, right?
She is going to meet him, but being there during the speech would have been problematic for her, because at some stage she would have had to applaud him, and that would create problems for the Democrats, because they've got a real problem with Arab Americans, with Muslim Americans, and crucially, a lot of them are in key battleground states. Michigan, for instance, there's a really sort of big concentration of Arab American voters in Michigan, and they have been rejecting Biden. And I think what she needs to do is to pledge support for Israel, as America has always done historically, but find a way of not being so sort of dogmatic in her level of support as Biden was at the beginning after the attacks in October. So I think she'll just sort of try and distance herself a little bit from the Biden policy there in a way that is kind of offering an olive branch to those Arab Americans who are really annoyed at the Biden administration's sort of support for Israel and the flow of arms that have gone to Israel.
Nick, two difficult questions to finish with. We've seen head-spinning developments over recent weeks in this race. Do you have any confidence at the moment as to who would be the favourite right now, Kamala Harris or Trump? And the second question, can either of them genuinely unite this country?
Well, that second question is the easiest one to answer. No, neither of them can unite this country. And division has always been the default. I mean, that's basically the argument of my book, The Forever War, America's Unending Conflict with Itself. There are so many things that divide this country. There are so many fault lines. There is so much history that is unresolved that I don't think anybody could unite this nation. I mean, Barack Obama really hoped that he could, that he'd bring about a post-partisan nation, even if he couldn't bring about a post-racial nation. But there will never be a post-partisan nation, I don't think, and a post-racial nation, because there can't be a post-historical nation. There is so much history that is unresolved that I don't think anybody could bring them together. As for the question of who wins, my stock response, David, I'm a correspondent, I'm not a clairvoyant. I don't know. And there are so many moving parts in this election.
No, that's a very smart response, I think, and given what's happened over the last month, who knows what will happen over the next few. Nick, it's been really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
That was a lot of fun. Thanks, David.
All right, and we're keen for your thoughts on this podcast as well, and any ideas you might have for future conversations, send us an email at insiders@abc.net.au, and we'll, of course, be talking more about, well, this amazing week in US politics Sunday morning. Hope you can join us then for Insiders. Bye for now.